Welcome back, everyone. We will move on to our next session titled What's New in Windows Server 2016 Hyper-V. Please welcome our speaker, Thomas Maurer, Cloud Architect of INX AG and Hyper-V MVP from Switzerland.
Thank you. Selamat Tingari, I hope this was right, but in your face I can't see it's probably not right pronounced. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thomas Maurer. I'm a Microsoft MVP for Hyper-V since a couple of years now. Now I moved to the cloud and data center MVPs, and I work as a cloud architect for a company called ITnetics, which is a company focused on engineering and consulting in Switzerland for Microsoft Cloud Technologies with Windows Server and System Center. And today I'm going to talk about a little bit what's coming with Hyper-V in Windows Server 2016, right? So there are a lot of new stuff coming, and I have a little bit of a disclaimer here already. As you may know, Windows Server 2016 is not a finished product yet. So right now it's in technical preview 4. And what Microsoft announced until today, it's not that it's finished, right, or feature complete. So a lot of things in here are maybe, it's not everything in there. There are a lot of other things coming as well. And there are some things maybe changing until the release of Windows Server 2016. And please don't ask me when it's released. We don't know. It will be released this year, that's for sure, but there is no real official timeline yet when it will be released. Okay, so first of all, I want to do a little bit of marketing and show you that Hyper-V is not that small player anymore it was, right? So if you have a look at this, this compares change of market share from Hyper-V to VMware in the past years, right? And what you can see, what's most interesting here is that Microsoft really, with the release of Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2, they made a huge improvement in market share. So they increased their market share. A lot of people are switching from VMware to Hyper-V since it's like basically can do the same thing, right? Even, of course, VMware has some good stuff too. Hyper-V has some good stuff. They're both good, but at the end, it's also about pricing, right? And a lot of people may know that Hyper-V basically is free. You can go out there, download Hyper-V today, and you can run your virtual machine out there on Hyper-V for free, especially when you have Linux virtual machines and you don't pay any licenses on that. So this was the only, I think the only marketing slide. Now let's talk a little bit about the technical stuff which is coming. First of all, I want to show you a little bit the quick improvements which are coming with Windows Server 2016, not only related to Hyper-V, but if you look at it, if you look at virtualization today, you can't just do virtualization. It's about bringing things together, right? You also have to do storage, networking, and other things to make sure that everything is working perfectly together and you get the right solution for you. So, sorry about that. We will talk about compute a little bit more since this is the Hyper-V session. So compute means basically Hyper-V virtualization. And 2 points I want to point out here. One is being that still a lot of people think that not everything can be virtualized. And Microsoft is really working hard on that to bring all the applications, all the big applications like SQL, Exchange, and things like that, and making it possible to run that on Hyper-V. Even with third-party vendors like SAP or Oracle, they're working together with them to make it Hyper-V a perfect fit for those products. And another thing I want to point out is Linux support, right? A lot of people still think that Linux doesn't run on Hyper-V or doesn't run very well on Hyper-V. That's just not true anymore. Microsoft invested heavily in the Linux kernel. They were even one of the biggest, the company with the most commits to the Linux kernel in the past years because they did so many improvements to the Linux kernel so it runs perfectly on Hyper-V. So there are a lot of improvements which I will talk about in this session. But let me also talk a little bit about networking. So from this networking slide, what you should take away is what Microsoft does, and they do that with a lot of products right now. They take what they have in the cloud. So they take, in terms of networking, they take what they have in Azure, they slightly modify that, and they're bringing that back to our on-prem data centers. So they're including basically the features and functionality from Azure in Windows Server. So for example, you probably, if you have played with Azure before, or if you had a look at Azure, you have seen distributed firewalls or software load balancers and things like that. That's all stuff coming to the on-prem data center in the next version of Windows Server. Then there's also storage. There are a lot of improvements in storage, and if you look at virtualization, storage is really begun to be critical, right? So that's where most of the time a performance bottleneck, the performance bottleneck is, right? And Microsoft did release some good software-defined storage solutions like storage spaces. They're also going to improve in the next version of Windows Server. And I have a session tomorrow about where I talk a little bit more about storage, what's coming next in storage tomorrow morning. Good. And one thing here, which wasn't really shown in the past years, is a new tab called security, right? When I talk to customers, they didn't really take security seriously. That's what I thought, or not all of them. Of course, there were some of them which security was really high important. But a lot of people were just happy that things are working. So they were happy that their data center is working, their virtualization is working, they don't have any performance issues, but they didn't really think about security. And Microsoft is bringing some cool new features here, and let's talk about that, especially in Hyper-V. In the past, it was all about protecting our virtual infrastructure, our Hyper-V servers, from the bad guys inside the VM, right? So we tried everything to protect our environment, our data center, from things which was running inside the virtual machine. But who protects the customer or the application owner from bad administrators, right? So for example, if you're a virtualization admin, or if I am a virtualization admin, today I have access to every virtual machine, all the data running inside a virtual machine. And this is something, as a customer, I don't want to, right? If I give you, as an IT administrator, I give you a virtual machine with a critical or important database, I don't want you to access it. So what you could do is just copy the virtual machine, take it home, and try to open it and get all the data outside. So Microsoft is doing something called shielded VMs, which is basically the overall name for a lot of small features inside the virtualization. And it helps you protect virtual machines from bad administrators, right? So they can't really access the virtual machine. So first thing what they did is the virtual secure mode. Virtual secure mode protects the memory and the processes of virtual machine. So an administrator has no access to the memory of the virtual machine, right? So he cannot take code from it. He cannot really get processes which are running inside the virtual machine. Everything is protected. The next thing is when the host is protected, right? What the administrator still could do is take the virtual machine, take it to another Hyper-V server, and try to attack it and try to crack that virtual machine open, right? Now, with the host guardian service, what Microsoft does is it checks every time the virtual machine starts if the host is a trusted host. And in that case, the virtual machine starts. If the host is not a trusted host, the virtual machine won't boot on that system, right? So if I copy a virtual machine from the data center, I copy it on my surface, and try to start it, it won't start. Okay, and this brings us to the last one, shielded VMs. And this allows us, basically it's very simple, it allows us to BitLocker protect virtual machines and encrypt the VHD or VHDX files here. Good, so what do I need for that? What I need is, I need a fabric to trust, which is trusted. I can do that using a TPM chip inside the physical servers. This would be the high-end version. You see that on the right side. Or you can also do that in an enterprise environment where you don't have TPM chips in your server, you can still use Active Directory and other scenarios to build a basic secure environment with the host guardian service. We don't have time to go deeper on this, but it's a really interesting scenario how you can protect virtual machines. Good. Next point in security is secure boot support for Linux. So Microsoft had secure boot support for Windows virtual machines, I think in 2012 or 2012 R2. Now they're also offering that to Linux-based virtual machines. And I think this is still, secure boot is still one of the underestimated features here, because it really helps you to get to protect you from some attacks against the operating system and against the kernel. So if you want to use secure boot, what you have to do is basically change the secure boot template for the virtual machine. You can do that using that PowerShell commandlet, or now with the newer builds of Windows Server, you can also do that in the UI. Okay. Now let me switch from security to resiliency and availability. This is really important, and what Microsoft tried to do in this release is making sure that your workload stays up whatever happens with the hardware underneath it, right? There were cases where VMs went down or services went down, which they were working fine, right? But the underlying system took them down for whatever reason. So we have two scenarios, or two new features in clustering, which are really interesting for Hyper-V environments. First of all, storage and cluster resiliency. This is one of the coolest features here. So who in this room runs Hyper-V clusters? Like 2008, 2012, okay? Not a lot of people, but that's fine. So some of you may have that issues that you were building a Hyper-V cluster and there was something wrong with the network. Nothing bad, but the network was away for a couple of seconds or minutes. And what failover clustering did was it reacted. It said, okay, I can't see that host anymore. This host, there must be something bad with that host. Let's shut that host down. Let's put it out of the cluster and boot the virtual machines up somewhere else, which is good if there were a real problem, right? But sometimes it just happens that the network between the hosts is just away for 40 seconds. It comes back. The virtual machine still would work fine, and that was a problem. So it took down the virtual machine even if it just didn't have to. The same here for storage. If your virtual machines are running and you lose connectivity to your storage for just a couple of seconds, I'm not quite sure anymore how much time it is. I think it's 30 seconds or something. The virtual machine goes down, right? It just like crashes, it goes and starts up on another host. Even if there was nothing really happening, and after 30 seconds, probably the storage came back, the connectivity came back, which caused downtime again. Same issue here, basically, just this time with storage. Now what Microsoft did is they introduced, as I said, the feature called Virtual Machine Storage Resiliency. And this allows you to set a property on how long storage can be away. And what it basically does, if storage goes away and the virtual machine, or the Hyper-V cluster realizes that, it kind of pauses the virtual machine for some time until the storage comes back and resumes it. This is a configurable time. It can be, you can set it to 30 seconds, and if the storage still doesn't come back, you can say, okay, now fail over the virtual machine, right? But you can say it's 2 minutes, and okay, pause it on 2 minutes, and if the virtual machine, if it really doesn't come back in 2 minutes, fail over, right? It's probably still better to wait 2 minutes until the failover, and instead of failing over the virtual machine as soon as you run. The other thing is, how I protect the first one? So this is cluster resiliency for virtual machines. In that case, a host probably has troubles with the network, and the virtual machines on that host are running fine, right? They are still here, everything is good, but the Hyper-V hosts can't see each other anymore because of a network outage. And in that case, there's also a value where you can set how many seconds this can happen. In that case, you set it for 1 minute or 2 minutes, and there's nothing happening 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, and they can still don't see each other, it fails over, right? But if the host sees each other again in this 2 minutes, it goes back to the cluster and everything is fine, no downtime for the virtual machines. Thing is good, right? Life is good. Now it can be, what I've seen is that cluster nodes having trouble like all 10 minutes, right? So they are having troubles, they're going out of the cluster, coming back, going out, coming back, and things like that. You have this flapping. Now, the failover cluster in Windows Server 2016 is so intelligent that he realizes, okay, there's something not good, there's something flapping, right? And what he does is, as soon as the host comes back to the cluster, he migrates all the virtual machines on another host, live migration, no downtime for the virtual machines, and puts the failing node in a kind of a quarantine. So he does not get any virtual machine on that host anymore, and you can like go and fix it, right? That's the good thing here. Good. So when we talk about availability, there's another cool feature called Shared VHDX. Shared VHDX is nothing new, to be honest. We had that since Windows Server 2012 R2 Hyper-V. And what it allows, for those who don't know, it's possible to attach a VHDX file to two virtual machines at the same time. So you could like build a virtual cluster for SQL or for file server or whatever to make it high available, right? Before that feature, you had to use iSCSI inside the virtual machine or virtual fiber channel and things like that, which were kind of a pain. And sometimes you don't have iSCSI in scenarios like this. With this, you make life easier, right? So it's a good feature, but it had some downtime. We couldn't really do backups on virtual machine which use shared VHDX files and other things. So what Microsoft is doing here, they are adding host-based backup for virtual machines which are using shared VHDX files, and they also allow you to online resize the shared VHDX file, which was also a huge problem, right? So think about, you have this huge file server cluster, and you have to add some storage, or you have to resize the virtual disk because you need more space. You had to take offline that cluster, and that doesn't make really sense, right? So these are two improvements coming to shared VHDX. And then another one, which is really interesting, for Hyper-V Replica. So Hyper-V Replica allows you to replicate virtual machines from one host or one cluster to the other, and it's a really good and cheap solution, to be honest, for failing over to other data centers and things like that. So if you have one site, you can replicate. It's free. It's included in the Hyper-V license. You can use that. It's perfect. Now, one downside of Hyper-V Replica, and we realized that when we were using it, is if you have a virtual machine which is replicating to the other side, and you add a virtual disk to that virtual machine, replication was just failing. It just said, okay, we don't replicate, we don't know what to do with that disk, and this will be gone in 2016 as well. So a lot of improvements coming here to make your environment more available. But now we come to the more cool stuff here. So one of them is runtime memory resize. What I can now do is, well, we had dynamic memory before, right? So dynamic memory was a feature which automatically added and removed virtual memory from a virtual server when it was needed. Now with runtime memory resize, we can now go and set it to static. With static memory, it gives you a little bit more performance in some cases. In some scenarios, static memory performs way better than dynamic memory. This is not needed for all virtual machines, of course, but for some is much better. And also, there are some applications which couldn't really handle dynamic memory, which weren't really supported. Now, we can use now static memory and resize it during the virtual machine is running. The other thing, and this is my favorite one when I talk to VMware customers, because since I'm consultant for Hyper-V, VMware customers always told me when they were like doing feature comparison, they were always going, yeah, but VMware can hot add network adapters and things like that. Even to be honest, not a lot of people do that. Well, you don't go there every day and add a network adapter to your virtual machine, right? But this was one of the points on the list, which was really fun to talk about. And now Microsoft added that feature as well in the next version of Hyper-V. So let me show you those two features. really quick. Let me switch to my demo here. So by the way, I'm not running here the version Windows Server 2016 on my system. I'm running a preview build of Windows 10, which is basically has the same features, or most of the features Windows Server has in Hyper-V. So I got my virtual machine here, and as you can see, let me switch here. I have here one network adapter. I can go to settings now, setting of those virtual machine. And you can see that I don't have, the network adapter is not grayed out anymore. So I can go here and say add. I don't connect it to a network now, but just add it, okay? And see it will show up. I can add another one. Here, I add another one. I can add another one. I could basically do that the whole day, right? So now that's good, but probably I don't need so many network adapters, right? Maybe one is just enough for me. So what I'm doing, I'm going to remove them. And you see, they're all going away. Perfect, right? Everything, no downtime for the virtual machine. But the even cooler thing here is, I think, is memory, adding memory. So you can see my virtual machine here got some memory. It's 1 GB of memory. You can see that here. Let's go in here and let's change that. Let's say, okay, now I need maybe 2 gigs. And as well, as you can see, it's not grayed out. I can just go here, add some memory, apply it. And what's going to happen, it changes to 2 gigs while the virtual machine is running. Right? Okay. I can also go here, and if the virtual machine, the memory is not used, I can also go here and switch it back. Now, you see here 2 gigs. You see here 2 gigs. You can also see here how much memory is added. Now, there's a bug in there. It doesn't really change here to 1 gig right now, but this is not a bug in Hyper-V. This is a bug in Task Manager, right? So if I close it here, you can also, by the way, you can see it's 1 gig. I close it and reopen it. If everything works fine, it shows me 1 gig, right? So there's a bug still in the Task Manager, but not in Hyper-V. Okay, good. So cool stuff coming. Now we're going a little bit faster. I asked the question earlier, who is using Hyper-V? And I know that some of you guys are using Hyper-V, and you know that upgrading from one version of Hyper-V to the other one is pain, right? It was really hard. From 2008 R2 to 2012, for example, you had to use this cluster migration wizard, where you basically said, okay, copy the cluster roles to a new cluster, and then move the storage from one cluster to the other one, and take the VMs up, and everything was okay. It was 2 problems here. First, you have downtime for your virtual machines, which is bad. Second one here is you had to build a new cluster, right? With new hardware. You had to buy new hardware to just upgrade to a new version. I couldn't really just do that. If you upgraded from 2012 to 2012 R2, things were a little bit better. You could build a new cluster, and you could live migrate the virtual machines from one node to the other. 2 issues here. One, again, you needed to build a new cluster. And the second one, live migrating virtual machines with storage takes a while, right? So it's not just moving raw memory, it's also moving the whole storage. And there are 2 problems with that. So upgrading Hyper-V clusters was not that easy than it should be. So what they're introducing is cluster rolling upgrades. Cluster rolling upgrades allows you to basically just take one node out of the cluster, reinstall it with Windows Server 2016, put it back to the cluster, and do that with all the nodes in the cluster. And then you're upgraded to 2016. So how this works is very simple. I have a 2012 R2 cluster here with running Hyper-V, running virtual machines. By the way, this is not only for Hyper-V, this also works for other clusters as well. So, and what you can see here, which is pretty new, is the cluster functional level here. So you have to think about that. It's like the functional level in Active Directory, right? So you can see the similarity here. So what I do basically is I move all the virtual machines away from one node. I take it out of the cluster, reinstall it however I want. I could use config manager, I could use virtual machine manager, I could just use an ISO, a DVD, whatever. Put it back to the cluster, and now I can move virtual machines on it, which is great. So I can do that for all the nodes until all the nodes are upgraded to 2016. But you still see that the cluster functional level now is still 2012 R2, and I still got the same functions in the cluster which I had with 2012 R2. Now what I can do is I can use a simple PowerShell commandlet here to upgrade the cluster to the new version, and after that I'm basically done. I'm done. I migrated the whole cluster to a new environment, and everything is working fine. Perfect, right? Makes upgrading easier. And what you can also do is a scenario here. Let's go back a little bit. In that case, you have this mixed mode cluster. You can still move virtual machines which were here back to another node and forward, right? So it works as a normal cluster even if you have two different operating systems in there. Let's go back. Okay, so to make this possible, we had to do something else as well, or Microsoft has to do something else as well. Today, if you move a virtual machine from an old version of Hyper-V to a new one, it automatically upgrades the virtual machine configuration file, right, with all the new features and all the new stuff and things like that. Now, the problem with that is you can't move it back anymore. It's like, it's a new version, right? So how can I move it back? This is going to be changed in 2016 as well. So Hyper-V virtual machines won't be upgraded to the latest version automatically. So you have to upgrade virtual machines to the latest version after you did the migration to 2016 Hyper-V. So in the early process, this was a PowerShell commandlet. So you had to say get virtual machines, update virtual machine configuration version. In the latest builds, you can also just right-click and say upgrade virtual machine configuration. Very easy, very simple. And if you have upgraded, for example, if you're running Windows 8 or Windows 8.1 and using Hyper-V, and you install Windows 10, you already have this function to upgrade virtual machines. Okay. Another big change coming is how Microsoft handles the integration service update. For those coming from VMware, that would be the VMware tools, basically the drivers for the virtual operating system. And until today, what Microsoft did is all the updates for the integration services were done on the Hyper-V host, and from the Hyper-V host, you updated the integration services of each VM, right? So what you had to do was you had to have the same version of integration service on the VMs as on the host, and things like were really, I would say it was complicated, right? It was not that, well, you have to teach people how things should be. Now, Windows Server 2016, things get a lot easier. So it's very simple. New integration services updates are coming over Windows Update or Microsoft Update. You can also use WSUS or Config Manager or whatever you use to update your virtual machines and upgrade the integration service directly. No dependency on the host anymore. You just patch the host and you patch the virtual machine, then you're fine. Okay. Now, next point is really interesting. Scale improvements. And this is one of the parts where everyone thinks now the next slide will be a comparison. How many CPUs could I use in 2012 R2 and how many can I now use in 2016? Unfortunately, Microsoft hasn't published yet anything on that. So we know that there's going to be improvement in scale. They're going to set up new limits. They're going to be higher as before, of course, so you can even use more memory than before. But they didn't really talk about it yet. So there is no information how big the limits are going to be and things like that. But they did some other things. So you can think it will be better anyway. So first of all, backup. There was a lot of improvements in backup, and I could show you 40 slides on how backup improved in Hyper-V. But there's one very interesting one going on. So they now have built-in change tracking in backup for backup software vendors, right? So how does that really affect us? Really, that doesn't really that helps the software vendors, but it doesn't really help us, right, as admins. So, but if you have done a Hyper-V project before, an early one, a new version of Hyper-V comes out, you are already set to migration, you have the hardware, you set up everything, and now you start to migrate, and then you think about backup, and then you realize your backup software is not really ready to back up your virtual machines. It's not supporting it, right? Some backup vendors have like a half a year to bring a new version out which support it. They are good examples, especially the guys out there, the green ones. They do a good job. They are really fast. They bring like, I don't know how many days it takes them, but after Hyper-V 2016 is released, they were really quick to go to a new version, right? But there are other ones which are not that fast. So this helps us to have faster software updates as well. The other thing here, configuration changes. Now, if you had a look at the folder where the Hyper-V virtual machine is today, you could see it was a .xml file where everything was in there, and you could also go there and edit it, for example. You could change the name, you could change the memory. By the way, it was not supported, right? Don't do that. And it's changing now. So the configuration format now is changing to a binary format. And this is done, Microsoft tells us, this is done for performance reasons, right? So if you have thousands of virtual machines running, they're all using this XML file, things are just going to be slow in some cases, right? So they built this binary format, which can't be edited really anymore with a notepad or something. You can only edit it with PowerShell. You can change the configuration over the official APIs, which is also a good thing. Okay, let's switch to operations, because I have another demo to show you. Production checkpoints. So who in this room is using checkpoints for virtual machines today? Okay. Well, basically what they said, Microsoft always told us, this is not something you should use in production, right? Because there are some issues with it. Now, we know that it's easy and it's a good thing to have checkpoints. For example, before you install a patch or an application and you don't know what's going to happen, you simply take a snapshot. And if it breaks anything in the application, you just roll it back, right? Very easy, very simple, or you can use that. Now, the problem with that, not every application can handle that. So, for example, domain controller was a good example in the earlier years. If you had a snapshot of a domain controller, like from 2 months ago, and you reverted back to that thing, it didn't realize that it was old and it was outdated, right? So it thought the database is still like new and it's all fresh, and you could run really some strange issues here and in some big trouble if you haven't seen it before. So with production checkpoints, this is going away. It's going to be much easier, and it will basically help you use checkpoints in production for that. So what's going to happen? I will show you that in a minute. And then I think another cool features, especially for us consultants, to set things up, to automate things, is PowerShell Direct. So I hope a lot of you are already using PowerShell. They're using PowerShell remoting and things like that. Now, it can happen that you don't have internet or network access to a virtual machine. So how do you go into that virtual machine? How do you remote into that virtual machine? So with PowerShell Direct, you can go not over the network, but you can directly go from the Hyper-V host inside the virtual machine with no network connectivity, right? Which is very cool. And then another feature here is network adapter identification. So basically, when you create a network adapter, you can give it a name, and you will see the name in the property of the network adapter, and this will help you automate things as well. So you realize if you have a virtual machine with multiple network adapters, which adapter is which network, which is which one. Sorry. So let me show you that quickly, or let me show you PowerShell Direct and some other things here. Okay, going back to my virtual machine. First thing here, I showed you that before. The virtual machine here is not connected to a network. So even if I go here, you can see the icon here shows there is no network connectivity or something going on. But I still want to use PowerShell remoting to go in there. So what I do, I go create a new PowerShell session. You can use PS session to remote into that. And the basic command would be computer name. Then you would enter the IP address or the name of the computer, and you would log in, right? But there's something new now. It's called VM ID, or you can also use VM name, for example. So my server or my VM is called server 1. Then I still need credentials. Can log in, and hopefully it works. And now I'm connecting through the VM bus from the Hyper-V directly into my virtual machine. I'm connected, and you can see, I'm connected to that VM using PowerShell. So let me go out. Okay, that's pretty cool. Another thing I want to show you is I have set this server here to use the old standard snapshots or checkpoints, right? So what I did, I changed it. The default now is production checkpoint, but to demo it, I will show you that how it works. So let me create a new text file here. And I will open that text file and will say hello. And now I will take a snapshot here, or a checkpoint, standard. And you can see it created a checkpoint now, or is creating one. It's done. And now I close that file, for example, and I close that. Now I want to go revert back to that snapshot. I click here, revert. It will take a while. It will restore that virtual machine, and it will also restore the memory, and you can see it's still open and it's still the same thing, which in some scenarios is good, but for production workloads, maybe not a good thing, right? If this is a snapshot from like 2 years ago or something like that, not a good thing. So what I can do is I can set this to production checkpoints. Sorry for calling it snapshot, but it was called snapshots for such a long time. Okay, I changed that to production, and that will take another one here. Let's call this prod. And it takes the snapshot successfully. Okay, production checkpoint created successfully. And now I can revert back to that one. And what's going to happen, basically, it turns off the virtual machine, it reverts the snapshot, reverts successfully, and it doesn't even turn it on anymore. So I have basically to boot it. And what's happening now in the virtual machine is basically it thinks, Windows thinks now it's restored from a backup. So it really knows that it's old state, it's something old, it's an old snapshot. And I can log in and use it as a server, right? That's good. So that's production checkpoints. And you can also see that I can mix production and standard checkpoints here. So I can do that if I want to, which is very cool. It's nothing really you have to take care of. Let me switch here. Okay. Good. Let's talk a little bit about isolation. And this is something I will talk a little bit more tomorrow. So in Windows Server 2012 R2, we had some really limited storage QoS features. So we could say maximum limit of IOPS per virtual disk, which was good. So we could limit that. In 2016, we get some new features here, which really allows you to set maximum IOPS for a set of virtual machines, for example. So we can say marketing departments gets, for all the virtual machines, gets 2,000 IOPS for all their virtual machines they're running on in total. Or what we can also do, customer A buys 5,000 IOPS for his virtual machines. And if he wants more for his virtual machines, he has to upgrade to a higher SLA or something like that. Pretty cool. And then another thing here, which is coming, and it's also a little bit a part of security, is host resource protection. Now, you can't really show that, or I didn't find a way to demo that. But what Microsoft learned running VMs in Azure, they realized that even bad guys had credit cards. So they went to Azure, bought some virtual machines, even if they were stolen credit cards, right? And they were like running some strange software to try to hack Azure or try to hack other virtual machines running there and things like that. They tried some really weird things. So Microsoft thought of an algorithm to detect things like that. So what they found was they could find that happening, and if a virtual machine does that, it will automatically take resources away from that virtual machine until the attack stops, right? If it takes away CPU cycles, it will take away memory and things like that until the attack is stopped, right? And this just happens in the background. It's just a feature which is enabled, and it's coming to Windows Server as well. All right, enhancing the platform. Now, sorry about that. Okay, there are some improvements to Hyper-V Manager. But when you looked at my screen, Hyper-V Manager looked basically the same, right? It didn't really change from a look and feel. But we get some improvements here. It's now connecting via WinRM, not the other stuff here. I can't really remember. DCOM things and some special things. You had some remoting issues. It's now using WinRM, which makes things easier. CRED SSP support. You can also now connect to an IP address instead of a name of a server, and all that kind of stuff. But most importantly, I think one of the things here is now you can down-level manage now Hyper-V server. So you go up and use the latest Hyper-V Manager console. You can manage Windows Server 2016, Windows Server 2012, Windows Server 2012 R2, which is great. And then it comes, there were some improvements in power management. When I thought about that, I was like, okay, what's coming now, right? There must be a big feature, right? But to be honest, it was all about the devices I have here on my desk. On Surface, on HP and things I've ordered like that. It was about connected standby. So if you're running Hyper-V on your Windows 10 device, or well, back then on your Windows 8 device, you had problems that you could not use connected standby. So connected standby, you could just basically close your notebook, open it again, and it was always on, right? So it was like really connected, really fast, like an iPad. So the Surface can do that. But if you enabled Hyper-V on Windows 8, it really didn't work anymore, right? So in Windows 10, it finally works again, and this is really good, especially for me since I run Hyper-V. Good. There are also some improvements in remote effects, which is for OpenCL support in new versions. So if you're doing VDI and terminal server and things like that, this is really going to help you. And we have also some improvements in Hyper-V cluster management. So if you have done scripts against virtual machines running in a Hyper-V cluster, this was hard, right? So what you had to do first is you had to get all the virtual machines from the cluster. You had to go and figure out on which node the virtual machine was running. And then you could do some remoting against that node and do some stuff, right? Now what's happening now in the future will be that Hyper-V cluster shows up as one big Hyper-V server in the background. And if you do a script, you can say, for example, get virtual machine host name, the cluster name, and you will get all the virtual machines from that cluster, and makes things easier for developers or for scripting as well. Okay, let's go to this one. Networking. As I said, I don't have time to talk everything which is coming with networking because there's a whole bunch of networking stuff coming, and it wasn't really ready until like TP4, I guess. So a lot of features are still missing. This is one of the biggest part which is coming. But it's all about network virtualization. And I told you that they are bringing features from Azure back to our data center. So one feature which is coming is VXLAN support for network virtualization. Before we had, for network virtualization, we used NVGRE. Now they will also offer VXLAN support in their system. So which is kind of a big deal because a lot of network vendors, they have appliances which support VXLAN, but they don't support NVGRE at all. Then we get virtual firewalls, so distributed firewalls, basic ones, but still good enough. Software load balancers, so we can simply create a new load balancer, which is basically a VM, which will load balance to other VMs. Not like NLB or something like that, but it kind of like works better. Then get some gateway improvements, some RDMA improvements as well. We can now use RDMA using virtual network adapters to the Hyper-V host, something big. If you have used or heard about RDMA, this is a big thing. And there is much, much more to come, right? So there will be more, but we can't just talk about it because we don't have any time for that. So let me skip this one more thing here. I'm not going to do that one, but if you're interested, since we run a little bit out of time here. There's one more thing, licensing. So a big upgrade, and this is maybe the most complex part of the whole thing, is licensing. So Microsoft is switching in licensing for Windows Server 2016, coming from socket-based licensing. They're switching to a core-based licensing model. So what you can see here is that, well, I'll give you that one here. So a license is you license the physical cores on a server, still not the virtual cores, the physical cores. If you're using, how's it called, hyperthreading or something, those cores don't count, right? So it's not double the thing. What you have to do is you have to a minimum core license of 8 cores per CPU, a max of 16 per server. So this gives you basically the same price as you had before, right? So you would like pay a data center or standard license, and you would have paid exactly the same price. Now, as you see, the blue one says, okay, I pay exactly the same price as before, but if I have like this 10 core CPU or higher, I have to buy extra licenses. So if I have 8 core CPUs, I'm paying basically the same thing as before. But if I'm going higher, I have to pay more. So you can buy, like, sold in 2 packs. So if you have, like, you can add another 2, another 2, another 2, which you can do. And this is done, well, this is done. I think when you look at the reason for that is today you have, when you look back 4 years, it's basically, it was like you could probably run 20 machines on a Hyper-V server. Now with the latest CPUs and memory and things like that, you can probably run 100 virtual machines for the same price, right? For the same licensing. So Microsoft thought a bit about that. We have to change that as well. So there's a link where I described a little bit more the licensing part. There is more interesting things here. They also, another big thing, they're also changing features, right? Until today, it was like standard and data center, they had the same features. It was only the VM count which was different. This is going to change as well. There will be only, some features will be only released in data center edition. But as again, here is some more information. You get the slides, you can look it up, and there are more links to the official websites where you get more information on that. So this was my part. If you have any questions, I got here some t-shirts which you can win. If you have some good questions, I will give it away. Otherwise, you can just come to me after the session and I can give it away for that. Yeah, that's basically it. So is there a question, anyone? Okay, yeah, there in the back. Perfect. Hi.
Let's say if I upgraded to 2016, right?
Yep.
So the cluster, is it revisable to 2012?
So I didn't hear the microphone
Let's
still.
say if I upgraded the cluster to 2016,
Yeah.
is it revisable to 2012?
Well, if you didn't have updated the functional level of the cluster, you could go back and add, again, 2012 R2 nodes to it. Yeah, you could go back. But after you upgraded the cluster, you can't really go and move the virtual machine, go back. If you don't like 2016, yes. If you like it, it's all good, right? Yeah. But if it's upgraded, you can't move back. Well, as soon as you change the cluster level, the functional level, you can't add any 2012 R2 servers anymore.
Thank you.
Great question, by the way. Some more questions? There's one. Can see it a little bit. Perfect.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, just a quick question. Previously, you were saying about the isolation of the VM, and then later on, you showed a demo about you can actually PowerShell script to the VM.
Yep.
So if you isolate that, will you still be able to VM?
Yep. It's a very good question as well. I think it's not going to work anymore. If you do shielded VM, you can't really go to the VM bus inside the virtual machine. If you do, I think you're running like shielded VMs, right? Is that correct? So even if you do shielded VMs, if you open the console, you won't see anything on the console anymore. If you use that window I used where I showed you, this will just be black. You don't have any, you can't even see the lock screen anymore. But this is important now. As I said, there's several parts, like virtual secure mode, shielded VM, and other things, host guardian services and things like that. And Microsoft is not, well, what I heard, they are not sure if they have to, they said that everything has to come together, or I can use single one of them as well. So I can like say, okay, I want to use BitLocker, but I don't want to use virtual secure mode, and in that case, I could probably go inside the virtual machine. But that's not something I can tell you right now. It's just not, I'm not sure. I think they know what they're doing, but they don't tell it right now. Very good question again.
You mentioned about the host protection service and some features that will prevent the VM from booting up. Yeah, my question, how would we know it's the host or something that is related to Hyper-V that is preventing the VM from booting up, as opposed to something that's more related to OS level or something else?
Well, you can only, you can see that in the event log on the Hyper-V host, of course. That's one thing, right? So you can see that. As a user, I can't really see because the virtual machine is not even starting, so I can't really see inside the virtual machine. But I will get the information in the event log. It will say that, okay, this is not a trusted host or a trusted environment where I want to boot this virtual machine. In that case, I can see that there on the Hyper-V host. Well, if it's a bad guy, he knows why it's not booting, right? If it's a good guy, he can see, okay, there must be something wrong with my environment, right? Maybe the host is not joined to that host guardian service or something like that. Did that answer your question? Okay. Good. Oh, okay. No, you don't count. Okay.
So you mentioned secure boot as a way to protect your virtual machines.
Yeah.
So that someone else cannot steal my virtual machines. Is there a way as well to protect my physical host, my Hyper-V machine, so that a Russian hacker cannot?
That's a very good question. There's a backstory to that. Alex is also an MVP, and he also does a presentation here. His server got hacked like 1 day ago from a Russian hacker, so he is now looking for some security tips to make sure that his server doesn't get hacked anymore. To be honest, just use a firewall. It's not that hard, and yeah. Okay, more questions?
So do I get to ask a question?
Last question? Or I'm here the whole 2 days. So if you have any questions, just come to our booth, the ITnetics booth. We can have some discussion there about Hyper-V. Join my session tomorrow about storage in Windows Server 2016, and join the other good sessions here. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas.